Hey everyone, pharmacist Benjamin Knight Fuchs here, registered pharmacist, cosmetic chemist, and nutritionist, and it's time for another episode of Skin Matters. So, we've been talking about vitamin A, which I consider to be the most important, or at least tied for being the most important topical ingredient you could ever use. Vitamin C is right up there, which we've also talked about. Alpha hydroxy acids are up there as well, and also ionic minerals. But a case can certainly be made for the potency and the power of vitamin A as being the most important topical ingredient that you can use on your skin. So, vitamin A is a vitamin, but it's a very unusual vitamin. It's a vitamin that acts like a hormone. It's a hormone-like vitamin. It has hormone effects, and that means instead of helping chemical reactions the way vitamins do, it actually makes things happen. Hormones, the word hormone means in Greek, I arouse to activity. Hormones turn things on. Vitamins assist, vitamins help, hormones make things happen. Vitamin A, even though we call it a vitamin, is actually really a hormone. It's part of a family of molecules which are called retinoids. You've all heard the term retinoic acid and retinol and retinol palmitate. Perhaps we'll talk about these three different forms of vitamin A. Collectively, they're part of a family that's found throughout nature, which is also going to become relevant, as we'll find out here in a moment, called the retinoids. They act like hormones because they actually turn on the cell by activating what's called the retinoid receptor. The retinoid receptor is on the cell, and like all hormones, it acts as a binder the way a socket will bind a plug. In fact, this plug and socket metaphor is actually kind of relevant and graphic way to explain how hormones interact with cells. So you think of a receptor as sitting on the outside of a cell, much like a socket on the wall, and you can think of a hormone as being a plug that sits in the socket. The retinoid receptor binds to the retinoid molecule, in our case today, of the vitamin A molecule. And this is especially important for cells of the immune system and the cells of the skin. In other words, immune cells and skin cells are particularly relevant when it comes to this binding of retinol and of retinoids and the retinoid receptor. So vitamin A is a retinoid. There's three different forms of vitamin A, three major forms of vitamin A. We call them retinol palmitate, retinol, and retinoic acid. I'll explain these three here in a moment. Before I get into that, I want to talk a little bit, before I get into the topical applications of vitamin A, I want to get into the internal uses of vitamin A. Internally, vitamin A is a must-have. Yes, it's a hormone, but it's a hormone that we have to ingest. It's a hormone that we have to get in through the diet or through supplementation. Deficiencies in internal vitamin A will show up as skin problems. Acne, for example, can be the sign of a deficiency in vitamin A. And one of the treatments for vitamin A one of the treatments for acne is vitamin A. In fact, one of the treatments for acne is also a pharmaceutical version of vitamin A called Accutane, which is a poison form of vitamin A that actually poisons the vitamin A chemistry inside a cell. You might say, why would I want to poison the vitamin A chemistry inside a cell? We'll talk about that here in a little bit. Deficiencies in vitamin A can also cause skin problems like hyperkeratosis pylorus. Hyperkeratosis, the word means hyper, too much, keratin, keratosis. Too much keratin can cause a condition called chicken skin. It can also cause plugs to form inside follicles, which can not only result in acne, but it can also cause blackheads. It can also cause ingrown hairs. Actinic keratosis, which is pre-skin cancer, can also be caused by vitamin A deficiencies. Immune problems can be caused by vitamin A deficiencies. The classic sign of vitamin A deficiency is night blindness. Vitamin A is actually used as a treatment for night blindness. Recommended daily allowance for vitamin A is pathetically low, like the recommended daily allowance for a lot of vitamins. I call the RDA, not the recommended daily allowance, I call it the ridiculous deficiency allowance because it keeps you ridiculously deprived of the amount of nutrients that you need. So the RDA for vitamin A is around 3,000 IU, 2 to 3,000 IU, a little less for women, a little more for men. But I recommend 10 to 20,000 international units a day. Dr. Atkins, famous Dr. Atkins of the Atkins diet, he used to recommend 100,000 IU of vitamin A for treating acne. Vitamin A is also very important for the immune system. As I said, immune cells have lots of receptors for vitamin A, and deficiencies in vitamin A are a serious risk factor for severe measles as well as for viruses. In fact, vitamin A is, if it's not, it should be part of the COVID protocol because of its immune boosting properties and its antiviral effects. So why is vitamin A such an important skin ingredient? Well, vitamin A works at the genetic level, and it works at the genetic level when it's topically applied. That is amazing. You can actually change your genetics when you apply vitamin A topically. We say vitamin A acts like an epigenetic factor. Epigenetics is a term that, or epigenetics is a term that refers to molecules that actually activate or have an effect on the genes. For many people believe that it's the genes that cause behaviors and cause things to happen inside the body. Well, there's actually factors that turn on the genes. Those are said to be epigenetic factors, and vitamin A is such an epigenetic factor, and it has its epigenetic effects when it's applied topically. That's amazing. You have a skincare ingredient that you can put on your skin that will change your genes and change your genes in a beneficial way. Talk about that here in a second. Vitamin A is also fat soluble, which means it penetrates through the surface of the skin. Remember, we talked about how the surface of the skin, the stratum corneum, is fatty. And in order to get things to penetrate through the stratum corneum, molecules have to have a certain fatty nature. Like dissolves like, as we say in chemistry. Vitamin A also is familiar. It has a molecular shape that is familiar to the skin. So that also facilitates its movement through the stratum corneum to the lower levels of the skin. Vitamin A deficiencies will cause skin barrier problems, and applying topical vitamin A to a weakened skin barrier can also lead to some problems. You have kind of a catch-22 because vitamin A is necessary for strengthening the barrier. Certainly internal vitamin A will strengthen the skin barrier, but you can also use topical vitamin A to strengthen the skin barrier, albeit carefully, because vitamin A is very stimulating. So if you have a skin barrier problem, which can manifest as dry skin or as sensitive skin or even hyperpigmentation, you may have a problem using vitamin A, particularly vitamin A in strong forms like retinol or retinoic acid. You can get around this problem by, number one, using internal nutrients that strengthen the skin barrier, things like phospholipids and lecithin and niacin and vitamin C and internal vitamin A. And you could also start your vitamin A program with a milder or a lower dose. So if you're going to use retinol, say, and you want to use retinol to strengthen your skin barrier, but your barrier is weak, start off by using internal nutrients to strengthen the barrier, phospholipids and niacin, vitamin C, and also essential fatty acids. And then also start your retinol program at a very low dose, and make sure you're taking lots of days off. Use it maybe once a week or once every couple of weeks to start, and start off with a very low strength, maybe 0.3% or 0.5%. Then work yourself into a 1% retinol. Then work yourself all the way up into a 5% retinol. One of the cool things about vitamin A is even though it's very stimulating and it can create some problems for folks who have skin barrier issues, eventually your skin will acclimate and adjust to vitamin A, to retinol or retinoic acid. And over the course of time, you'll find that you're able to use your retinol or retinoic acid product more frequently, and you're able to use a higher and higher concentration of retinol and retinoic acid, the two major forms, the two most active forms of topical vitamin A. So vitamin A supports the growth of cells, the proliferation of cells. This is how it creates a stronger barrier. Remember, the skin cells are born in the bottom and they rise up to the top and they become the barrier. Vitamin A will support the movement of cells from the bottom to the top and thereby helping strengthen the barrier. There's a process called in cell chemistry called differentiation. Differentiation refers to the different shapes cells take as they develop, as they mature. So cells are born, in the case of skin cells, they're born at the bottom of the skin, in the basal layer, and as they're rising up from the bottom to the top, they're taking on a different shape as they're maturing. They start their life flat, round and plump and juicy, and they take on different shapes as they're rising up to the top, and they finally come to rest at the top, flat and dead. They go from round and plump and juicy to flat and dead. The round and plump and juicy is a living cell. The basal layer contains these living cells. They're called keratinocytes at that point. And as they rise up to the top, they gradually lose their internal organs, internal substructures, internal organelles, which, by the way, are dumped overboard, or they shapeshift inside the keratinocyte, the skin cell, as it's rising up. That's a really cool process, by the way. As the cells are maturing and they're dumping their contents overboard, those contents actually become lipids that will act to strengthen the barrier and act as natural hydrators. And inside the cell, the contents that are kind of shape-shifting, are kind of taking on different shapes, those end up becoming what's called the natural moisture factor. So this maturation process as cells are rising from the bottom to the top, or this differentiation process, is super important. And all the steps have to be taken. So in the differentiation process, there's step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. There's a bunch of different steps, and each one of those steps is important. If the cell does not take on each individual step, if it skips steps, or if it gets stuck in a step, you can have all kinds of skin diseases. Number 1, psoriasis. That can be caused by skin cells skipping steps. Psoriasis is said to be a differentiation issue. Skin cancer is said to be a differentiation issue. Eczema is said to be a differentiation issue. Acne is said to be a differentiation issue. Because vitamin A controls and regulates the differentiation process, it's used to treat all of these conditions. It's used to treat psoriasis. It's used to treat acne. It's used to treat skin cancer. By supporting the differentiation process, vitamin A assures the skin or cells that they'll take on each individual step, and the process will occur in a regulated fashion. And that's why vitamin A is used to treat all of these skin differentiation issues. In fact, even inside the body, differentiation issues can be a cause of cancer, and vitamin A, of course, is used to treat certain forms of cancer, particularly lung cancer. So differentiation is a problem on the skin. It can cause problems with psoriasis, eczema, acne, dry skin, barrier issues, sensitive skin, hyperpigmentation, and internally cancer. And vitamin A plays a key role in differentiation, so it can be therapeutic for all of these differentiation issues. Vitamin A is also a secretory vitamin. It supports secretions. The secretions of mucopolysaccharides are also known as GAGs. And these GAGs, glycosaminoglycans, are very important for, number 1, connective tissue, number 2, moisturization and hydration of the skin, and also for helping create a strong skin barrier. Vitamin A also supports the secretion of growth hormone. So vitamin A actually has an anabolic effect. I call vitamin A vitamin anabolic. Anabolic or anabolism means to build. Vitamin A is a building vitamin as much as it's a barrier-supporting vitamin and skin health vitamin. Interestingly, Accutane inhibits the secretions that are induced by vitamin A. The thinking is, acne is partially caused by too much sebum or too much oil, so we'll use a poison form of vitamin A, which will slow down secretions and thereby will help reduce or even eliminate or reverse acne. That may happen, and that does happen sometimes for folks, but at the same time, because Accutane inhibits secretions, it blocks vitamin A activity, people who take Accutane get incredibly dry skin, dry throats, dry eyes. It's a very uncomfortable condition, very uncomfortable side effects that occur when people take Accutane, but that's the benefit of Accutane, is it dries things up. My personal opinion is it's not a good idea, and really, unless you're totally desperate to get rid of your acne, and Accutane doesn't always work, but sometimes it does, it's not a great idea to use Accutane unless you're really desperate. So vitamin A topically comes in 3 main forms. The first form is called retinol palmitate, and that's the form of vitamin A that you're going to find in most department store products or drugstore products. It can be converted into active vitamin A, but not very effectively. It does have some skin hydration effects when it's applied topically. It is the form of vitamin A that's stored in the skin. Vitamin A is stored in the skin. Like a lot of vitamins, vitamin C is stored in the skin, vitamin E is stored in the skin. The form of vitamin A that's stored in the skin, as well as in the body, is retinol palmitate. And that, as I say, is the kind of vitamin A that you'll find in most drugstore products or cheap, relatively cheap topical skincare products. Not very effective, has a little bit of activity. Most of its activity is superficial because it is kind of a lipid, has a lipid form, so it can have a skin softening effect temporarily. But if you really want to have vitamin A activity, that epigenetic vitamin A activity or the pro-differentiation vitamin A activity, you want to use either retinol or retinoic acid. Those are the two main forms of active vitamin A. Retinol palmitate can get converted into retinol or retinoic acid, but why deal with the whole conversion and you're not going to get a lot converted? Go right for the real stuff. The real stuff is retinoic acid, which comes in the topical product called Retin A, or retinol. Retinol is actually stored in the skin. Probably 90% of the vitamin A in the skin is retinol palmitate. Around 10% is retinol. It is not active on its own. Well, I shouldn't say that. It is active on its own, but it doesn't have the same activity the retinoic acid has. It's about 100 times weaker than retinoic acid. Nonetheless, the benefit of retinol is you can get it over the counter. You don't have to deal with the doctor's prescription. It does have activity on its own, and it will get converted into retinoic acid, which is really the best form, the most powerful form of vitamin A, even though it does require a prescription. So if you don't want to deal with the doctor, you can still get retinoic acid in your skin by using retinol, and retinol on its own has a little bit of activity. Retinoic acid, the active form of vitamin A, and I mean it's really active, is not stored in the skin to any great extent. It's broken down pretty quickly, but it does have some pretty significant skin benefits for anti-aging and also for treating acne, as well as for treating some of the skin diseases that are associated with vitamin A deficiency. You'll find Retin A in strengths of 0.01%, 0.05%, and 0.1%, also 0.025%, I should say, and 0.1%. Those are the four main strengths of retinoic acid. If you want to use retinol, you can get a lot of the benefits of retinoic acid by using retinol, but because it's about 100 times weaker, you want to make sure your retinol is somewhere around 1% to 5% strengths. Now, the downside on retinol is that it is really strong at 1% and 5%, and there's not a lot of companies that produce 1% and 5% products. Personally, when I'm formulating retinol, I use 1% and 5% because I want my patients to have the real deal. I want them to have really strong products, really powerful concentrations, so you really get benefits. There's another form of vitamin A that sometimes people will talk about called retinaldehyde. Some people will say, oh, retinaldehyde is closer to retinoic acid, which it is, but really retinaldehyde is turned into retinol and retinol is turned into retinaldehyde. Retinaldehyde is unstable, and most retinaldehyde products are very, very tiny doses. And I'm a pharmacist. I'm always thinking of doses. I want my patients to have good, strong doses, which is why I use retinol. I prefer retinol and retinoic acid. Retinaldehyde, because it's so unstable, you're never going to see it in a product in high enough concentrations. It's usually about marketing, and there are some people will tell you, oh, it's closer to retinoic acid in the breakdown in the pathway. Retinol gets turned into retinoic acid, but before it gets turned into retinoic acid, it takes us a little detour into retinaldehyde. So people say, well, retinaldehyde is closer to retinoic acid, so it's better. BS. Retinaldehyde gets turned into retinol. Retinol gets turned into retinaldehyde. We say it's a reversible chemical reaction, but the benefit of retinol is it's much more stable than retinaldehyde. You can use higher doses of retinol and really get powerful effects that you can't get with retinaldehyde. So what are these effects? What are the benefits of topically applied vitamin A? Well, there's tons of them. We talked about differentiation. We talked about it being used as a treatment for acne and for psoriasis and for pre-skin cancer, actinic keratosis, for hyperkeratosis of the skin, i.e. chicken skin. Vitamin A supports the production of skin lipids. So retinol and retinoic acid, in a way, are natural moisturizers. They may not feel like they're moisturizing the skin immediately, but over the long run, because they support the secretion of your skin lipids, the fats in the skin, they'll have hydration effects and moisturization effects in the long term, and that is not in the superficial way that so-called moisturizers moisturize the skin, but real moisturization by supporting the production of skin lipids. Vitamin A decreases something called MMPs, and these MMPs are ingredients that break down collagen. They're associated with photo damage and sun exposure. So in a way, vitamin A is a sun protectant. It actually protects the skin from the breakdown products for the molecules that break down connective tissue in response to the sun. It's an anti-MMP, decreases ultraviolet solar-induced MMPs, and thereby has a beneficial effect on photo damage. Of course, it also upregulates the proliferation of the skin of the cells that make collagen. It stimulates collagen production, so it'll also reverse photo damage, not just prevent photo damage. It actually reverses photo damage as well. And by the way, vitamin A actually has protective effects against ultraviolet radiation. So in a way, it's like a natural sun protecting product. Vitamin A supports healthy melanocytes. That is, it supports the health of the cells that make pigment. So not only will it help make pigment, help support pigment, but it also has an anti-hyperpigmentation effect because it's exfoliating and can help remove excess skin pigment for the melasma patient. And the exfoliation stimulates turnover, so it also supports the skin barrier. So there's lots of incredible benefits for skin diseases like acne and actinic keratosis and hyperkeratosis and psoriasis. There's anti-aging benefits, there's sun protection benefits, there's barrier strengthening benefits, there's moisturization benefits, there's exfoliation and skin smoothing effects, anti-hyperpigmentation effects. This is an amazing ingredient, folks. And in my humble opinion, you're crazy if you're not using vitamin A on a regular basis, although if it's retinol and retinoic acid, you want to be using it intelligently and strategically. Because retinol and retinoic acid are so powerful, and some people have sensitivities, they shouldn't have sensitivities, and sensitivities are always a sign that the skin is not as healthy as it should be, or the skin barrier is not as healthy as it should be. But because some folks have an issue with retinoids, there are alternatives that are out there. There are topical ingredients that act like retinoids. Remember, retinoids work by binding to the retinoid receptor on a cell membrane. Well, there's other molecules in nature that will bind to that retinoid receptor. Pretty much everybody's heard of something called beta carotene, and beta carotene is said to be the vitamin A alternative that vegetarians can use. Vitamin A is only found in animal products. There's no plants that make vitamin A, but there are plants that make some of these alternatives. Beta carotene is the classic alternative to vitamin A. There's a topical ingredient called bakuchiol that has gotten a lot of press. I remember being at a trade show maybe 25 years ago, and I met this guy who actually was the guy who developed bakuchiol, and he told me, oh, I've got this new ingredient. It activates the vitamin A receptor. It's going to be really big. And I kind of laughed it off, but he's right. As it turned out, it became pretty big. Nonetheless, I don't really see a lot of benefits from bakuchiol, which is said to be an alternative to retinol and retinoic acid, because it activates the retinol and retinoic acid receptor. It turns out that PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids like GLA, which is an awesome ingredient for the skin, by the way, gamma linoleic acid, omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids, those will actually have some retinoid benefits because they activate the retinoid receptor. There's also pharmaceutical retinoids that will activate the retinoid receptor. Accutane, we talked about earlier, that has a pharmaceutical anti-retinoid effect. Why anti-retinoid? Because it slows down or even stops secretions from cells which are thought to be involved in the formation of the development of pimples for the acne patient. There are also other retinoid, pharmaceutical retinoid drugs, we'll say, synthetic retinoids that activate the retinoid receptor. One is called tazarotene. Tazarac is the brand name. Another is called adapalene. Differin is the classic product that contains adapalene. So there's other ways that you can get retinoids, either natural retinoids or synthetic retinoids. But you know what? In my opinion, from a topical perspective, nothing beats retinol and retinoic acid. Retinol, if you don't want to deal with a prescription, make sure the concentrations are high enough. Retinoic acid has been the go-to anti-aging topical. In fact, retinoic acid is the only FDA-approved topical ingredient for reversing photo damage. It's also used to treat acne, of course. If you want to go get a prescription, retinoic acid is good. But I like retinol personally because you don't need to deal with a doctor's prescription. It's available over the counter. Just make sure your concentrations are high enough. Last thing is, and this is kind of interesting, there are a lot of folks who tell you not to use vitamin C with retinol or retinoic acid. I think they're wrong. Now, it's true that ascorbic acid, which is one of the forms of vitamin C, the most commonly used form of vitamin C, will break down in the presence of retinol and retinoic acid. It's not true about fat-soluble vitamin C. We talked about this on another Skin Matters episode. We talked about THDA, tetrahexyldecyl-ascorbate. Tetrahexyldecyl-ascorbate. THDA is fat-soluble vitamin C. Fat-soluble vitamin C does not break down in the presence of retinol or retinoic acid. In fact, there's actually a synergistic effect between retinol and THDA. They're perfect together. THDA helps take a little bit of the bite out of retinol, and retinol improves the penetration of THDA. So they work synergistically. So anytime somebody tells you don't use your retinol or retinoic acid with vitamin C, you tell them, oh no, that's ascorbic acid. That's not THDA, which is fat-soluble vitamin C and very stable. So that's our story about vitamin A. I think it is the most, or at least one of the most important ingredients you could put on your skin topically. In my humble opinion, if you're not using topical vitamin A in its retinol or retinoic acid form, you're missing the boat on topical skincare. Of course, taking vitamin A internally is always important. Vitamin A is a hormone, but it's a vitamin that is essential, without which you will have problems with the immune system, problems with the skin, as well as problems with the eyes, also problems with the liver for that matter too. So make sure you're taking about 10,000 to 20,000 international units of vitamin A a day, as well as using retinol and retinoic acid on a regular basis topically to keep your skin young and beautiful. All right, I'm pharmacist Ben Fuchs. That's another Skin Matters episode. I am so happy that you've listened to this episode because remember, your skin matters.